Before we begin, understand this. Some men are born into power. Some men build it brick by brick, body by body. And some men, the rarest kind, walk away from it. Not because they lost, because they finally understood what it cost. Opening hook. He could have had anyone in that city killed by sundown. And the one thing he couldn't do, the one thing that had defeated him for 31 years, was authorized has moved through those grounds in 11 years. Not since Dominic Cross made an example of the last man who tried. The city glows beyond the tree line. His city, a kingdom that has no crown, no throne, no public record, only consequences. Only the deep, systemic fear that moves through certain streets like weather. Dominic doesn't look at the city. He looks at his hand. There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in the homes of powerful men. It is not peaceful silence. It is not the silence of a forest or a cathedral or an empty beach at morning. It is the silence of a place that has been made silent, where noise was once punished, where the wrong word cost the wrong man everything, where even the walls learned to hold their breath. Dominic Cross had lived inside that silence for 23 years. He had built it the way other men build legacies, carefully, deliberately, at tremendous personal cost. He had furnished it with loyalty and terror in equal measure. He had polished it until it gleamed. Standing at that window, in the last private moment of his old life, he understood something that no amount of power or money or carefully maintained silence had ever been able to teach him. The silence wasn't peace. It was just absence. And the things that were absent, the things the silence had replaced, had consumed, had quietly buried in the beautiful manicured grounds of his magnificent isolation, those things had not disappeared. They had only been waiting. He raises the glass, doesn't drink, sets it down on the windowsill. He looks at his hand one more time. Then he unclenches his fist. And something in his face changes, not dramatically, not with tears or trembling, just a small, nearly invisible floor morning. The offices are immaculate, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the financial district. Artwork on the walls that costs more than most people earn in a decade, not purchased for beauty, but for the precise, calculated signal it sends. That the man who sits behind that desk has transcended the world that made him. Dominic Cross sits behind the desk. He is reading a report prepared by a man named Tomas Vega, his intelligence officer, and the report is about a name from 31 years ago. Dominic Cross. Felix Dre, Dominic's right hand for 16 years, stands at the door. Felix, she's in Juarez. Felix was not a man who delivered information loudly. He spoke quietly because he'd learned, early in his tenure with Dominic Cross, that quiet was the language that got heard. Dominic didn't look up from the report. Dominic, I know. Felix said nothing. He had learned the geometry of Dominic's silences, which ones invited speech, which ones closed it off. This one was closed. He waited. Dominic, 31 years. You know what 31 years does to a debt, Felix? Felix considered the question seriously, because Dominic's questions were always serious, even especially the ones that sounded rhetorical. Felix makes it heavier. Dominic Cross looked up. He looked at Felix for a long moment with those eyes gray, almost colorless, the eyes of a man who has spent decades watching things through windows, and something passed across them, something that Felix in 16 years had never seen, something that looked almost like relief. Dominic makes it heavier, yes. He closed the report. He set it on the desk with the careful, deliberate placement of a man who organizes his workspace the way other men manage their emotions, with precision, with control, with the understanding that disorder is just chaos waiting to be invited in. Then he folded his hands on the desk and said something that, in 16 years of standing in that room, Felix Dre had never heard Dominic Cross say. Dominic, I'm going to Juarez alone. Beat. Felix Dre did not visibly react, but something behind his eyes shifted, the way the foundation of a building shifts before anyone can feel it, deep, structural, the first physics of collapse. Felix, for how long? Dominic, however long it takes. Felix, the Marchetti proposal has a deadline. Dominic, let it expire. Felix absorbed this. The Marchetti proposal, a territorial expansion that would give the Cross organization controlling interest in 3 additional districts and a port facility, had been 18 months in negotiation. It was, by any measure, the most significant strategic opportunity the organization had encountered in a decade. Felix, Dominic. It was the first name. Felix rarely used it. It was the equivalent in their professional vocabulary of grabbing a man's arm. Dominic, let it expire. Quiet final, the way certain doors close. Felix nodded once. He turned to leave. Dominic, Felix, tell Vega to pull everything he has on Cartel del Cielo, who runs the Juarez operation specifically, who the lieutenant is, who he answers to, and tell him I want to know where Marco Ruiz sleeps. Felix's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Felix, Marco Ruiz has been protected for 11 years. The Ruiz family has. Dominic, I know what the Ruiz family has. I'm the one who gave it to them. Tell Vega. Felix left. Dominic Cross sat alone in his glass office above his city and looked at his hands. The blood was gone. He'd washed it eventually, but he'd spent 3 days before that carrying it, and you don't carry something for 3 days without it leaving a mark that soap can't reach. He looked at his hands for a long time. Then he opened his desk drawer and removed a single photograph. We don't see it clearly. We see its edges. We see the way he holds it, Not the way a man holds evidence, but the way a man holds something irreplaceable. We see his face. And that's enough. The inventory of a kingdom. What does it mean to leave an empire? Not to lose it. Losing is something that happens to you. Not to be taken from it. Removal is someone else's action upon your life. To leave. To choose. To look at everything you have built. All the power and protection and insulation from the world that made you. All the loyalty bought and earned and enforced. All the architecture of control that you have spent the most vital years of your life constructing. And to turn your back on it. To walk away from the only language you have learned to speak fluently. What does that mean? Follow Dominic Cross for one day, his last full day in his kingdom, and find out. Interior Cross Estate, private kitchen, 6:15 a.m. He made his own coffee. Had always made his own coffee, a small, stubborn domesticity that persisted from before the money, from the apartment in the Holloway district, where the kitchen was the size of a prison cell, and the coffee maker was a hand-me-down that needed to be coaxed every morning like a difficult witness. He stood at the stove, a professional Viking range that cost more than most cars, and he made coffee in a battered Italian mocha pot that was older than his empire. Black, no sugar, the scent of it moving through the kitchen like a memory. The kitchen was otherwise empty. The staff had learned years ago not to enter before 7. Dominic Cross's mornings were his own, the one private thing he had kept. He pours the coffee. He stands at the kitchen island and drinks it standing up, looking at nothing. The kitchen window faces east. Morning light comes through it at this hour at a particular angle, hitting the granite counter and throwing a rectangle of gold across the floor. Dominic's bare feet are in the light. His face is in the shadow. He has lived like this in some form for 31 years, half in light, half in dark. He is so accustomed to it that he no longer notices it consciously. But this morning, for some reason, he looks down at the light on his feet, and something moves across his face. At 7:30, he met with Patricia Wells, his lawyer, and one of the 3 people on earth who was permitted to speak to him without filtering herself. Patricia was 61, formidably intelligent, and possessed of a particular quality that Dominic Cross valued above nearly any other human attribute. She had never, in 19 years, told him what he wanted to hear instead of what was true. They met in his study, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace that actually worked, leather chairs that had conformed to the shapes of the people who sat in them. Dominic's chair had a slight depression on the left armrest, where his elbow rested during the conversations he didn't want to have but understood he needed to. He sat in that chair now. Dominic. The revocable trust becomes irrevocable if I'm absent more than 90 days. Patricia. Correct. 90 days and the management structure becomes autonomous. Felix Dre holds operational authority. Cross Capital's board assumes fiduciary control. You'd still technically own everything, but controlling it would require your physical presence and a 60-day petition period. Dominic. I understand. Patricia. Do you? Not a question. Patricia looking at him over the rims of her glasses with the particular expression of a woman who has seen too much to be surprised, but who reserves the right to name it anyway. Dominic. Ask the one you think I'll answer. Patricia set the files on the side table. She looked at him directly. Patricia. Is she still alive? The fire crackled. Outside, a bird called once and went quiet. Dominic. As of 72 hours ago, yes. Patricia nodded slowly. Patricia. And the message? Dominic. I told you about the message. Patricia. You didn't have to, Dominic. I've been your lawyer for 19 years. I handled the incorporation that set up the Callaway Trust. I handled the documentation that made sure a certain woman in a certain city could access a certain account every month without leaving a trace back to you. I've been managing the logistics of your conscience for nearly 2 decades. When you tell me you're going to Juarez alone, I don't need to see the message. Long silence. The kind that Dominic Cross usually fills with nothing, with that particular weighted absence that compels other people to keep talking until they've said something they didn't intend to. But Patricia Wells never kept talking. She knew the trick. She'd seen him use it. So the silence was mutual. 2 people who trusted each other enough to let something real occupy the space between them. Dominic. She's in trouble, real trouble, the kind that doesn't wait for me to decide if I'm ready. Patricia, are you? Dominic. No, but it doesn't matter. Patricia looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the space between the chairs and put her hand briefly on his arm. Not a gesture of comfort exactly, more like acknowledgement, like placing a hand on the door of a room you know someone has to walk through alone. Patricia, the trust documents are in order. Everything is structured to function without you for up to a year. Dominic, it won't take a year. Patricia, no, I don't imagine it will. She removed her hand. She opened her files again. The professional conversation resumed. But something had shifted in the room, some small, private seismic event. Something that felt, if you were watching closely, like the beginning of a farewell. Exterior Cross Estate grounds afternoon. He walked his grounds after lunch. This was not unusual. He walked the grounds every day, a habit that began as security assessment and had become, over time, something closer to meditation. The circuit took 45 minutes at his pace. He knew every tree, every stone in the pathway, every place where the iron fencing met the hedgerow. Today he walked the circuit twice. On his second circuit, he stopped at the eastern corner of the property, the corner where the iron fence met the oldest tree on the grounds, an oak that was there long before the house was built, that would be there long after. He stood with his hand on the fence, looking out through the iron toward the tree line and beyond it, the distant smear of the city. He stood there for a long time, long enough that the light changed, long enough that whatever Dominic Cross was looking at, it was not the tree line. That night at 9:47 p.m. his phone rang. A number not saved in his contacts, but committed to the particular archive of his memory that held everything important, everything dangerous, everything he had not permitted himself to forget. He answered. Woman's voice, you got my message. Dominic's eyes closed for a half-second, the briefest, most private response. The voice was a woman's, not old, not young, weathered in the particular way that specific kinds of experience weather a voice, not age but exposure. Dominic, I got your message and I'm coming. Silence on the line, long enough to carry meaning. Woman's voice, Dominic, you understand what you're walking into. Dominic, I understand. Woman's voice, Marco Ruiz isn't the same. What you remember of him, that's not who he is anymore. He's been with Del Cielo for 6 years. He runs the Eastern Corridor. He has 70 men. Dominic, I know what he has, I built it for him. Another silence. Woman's voice, she has 3 days, maybe less if Del Cielo decides to accelerate the schedule. Dominic, I'll be there in 18 hours. Woman's voice, you should bring people. Dominic, no. Woman's voice, Dominic. Dominic, no, this is mine to carry. The voice was quiet for a moment. Woman's voice, you're going to get yourself killed. Dominic, maybe, but I'll be there. He ended the call. He sat in the study for another hour. Then he went upstairs. He didn't sleep. He sat in the chair by his bedroom window and watched his city. The last night he would watch it from here, one way or another, and he let himself feel something. He watched his city until the sky began to lighten. Then he got up, finished packing the single bag he had packed the night before, and walked out of his kingdom. He didn't look back. We do, though. We look back at the house, enormous, beautiful, silent, as his car moves down the drive. The motion-sensitive floodlights trigger once briefly as he passes beneath them. Then they go dark. The house stands in the early morning gray. Empty. What he left behind. He drove himself. This was the first departure. In the Cross organization, Dominic Cross did not drive himself. He was driven by one of 3 approved drivers who had been vetted through a process that made CIA background checks look casual. He drove himself. A black Mercedes S-Class, registered under a clean name, chosen because it was the most common color in the most common class in this city, and therefore the most invisible out of the estate gates and into the city as it was waking. He drove through the Holloway district. This was not the direct route to the private airfield where his plane waited. This was a detour, a deliberate one. The Holloway district in the early morning was a particular kind of alive, the unglamorous, persistent vitality of a neighborhood that has never been gentrified because there's nothing aesthetically appealing enough about poverty to attract the renovating class that has survived through sheer, ornery refusal to stop existing. Bodegas with their metal grates half raised, men with coffee cups standing outside, breath fogging the cold air, a school bus turning the corner, a woman in scrubs walking fast with her eyes down, late shift ending or early shift starting, the mathematics of essential work. Dominic drove at the speed limit. He passed a building on Holloway Street, a 6-story brick building that had been, 31 years ago, the site of a much smaller, much shabbier building. A building that no longer existed. A building that Dominic Cross had personally insured would no longer exist by purchasing it through an intermediary 3 years after he had the money to do so, and having it quietly demolished and replaced with the current structure. The current structure had 12 affordable units and was maintained through a foundation with no public connection to the Cross name, at below-market rent. Nobody in the Holloway district knew that Dominic Cross paid for that building. He had not wanted credit. He had not wanted absolution. He had just needed the old building to not exist anymore. He parked across the street from it for 5 minutes. He looked at the brick, the windows, the woman on the 3rd floor who was visible through her window, moving in the kitchen, making breakfast, beginning a day that would be, by any reasonable accounting, difficult, underpaid, exhausting, and unremarkable. He looked at her, then he looked at his hands on the steering wheel. He drove on. The airfield was 40 minutes outside the city. Tomas Vega met him at the gate, a small, precise, relentlessly efficient man of 44 who had served the Cross organization for 12 years in the specific capacity of knowing things that other people didn't want known. He handed over a manila envelope and a coffee he'd brought for Dominic, both without ceremony. Vega, Del Cielo's Juarez operation. Marco Ruiz runs it from a compound in Colonia Patria, 11 full-time security, 4 rotating shifts. The compound has 2 vehicle entrances and 1 pedestrian gate on the eastern side. Dominic, comfortable men make mistakes. Vega, comfortable men with 11 guards still have 11 guards. Dominic, the girl. Vega being held at the compound, 3rd building eastern side, 1 guard on the door rotated every 6 hours. She's unhurt. Currently. The word landed, currently. Dominic's face didn't change, but his fingers tightened, barely perceptibly, on the edge of the envelope. Dominic, how long has Ruiz known? Vega, about her connection to you. We believe 3 months. He's been watching her since the spring. He's been patient. Dominic, he learned from the best. Vega, your flight plan takes you to El Paso. Car service from there to the crossing point. I've arranged documentation. The name is Daniel Calloway. Vega, you could send a team. Dominic. No, take care of things while I'm gone, Tomas. Vega, always. They did not shake hands. They had never been handshaking men. Their relationship was expressed in other currencies, in the precision of information, in the reliability of execution, in the kind of professional trust that is indistinguishable in its depth from loyalty. Dominic Cross walked toward the plane. Tomas Vega watched him go. He stood watching until the plane door closed and the ground crew began their preparations. Then he walked to his car. He had work to do. ACT2, the debt. The road to Juarez. From the air, the landscape between the city he left and the city he was going to was a kind of geological sermon. The slow, patient transformation of green into brown, of familiar into foreign, of the manicured into the elemental. Mountains appeared from nowhere, massive and indifferent. The Rio Grande carved its line through the desert like a scar that had healed wrong, and below it all the border invisible from the air, lethal on the ground. Dominic Cross watched it from the plane window with the attention of a man memorizing something. Not the geography. The past. What needs to be told, somewhere between the city he left and the city where the debt waited, is the story of how the debt came to exist. 31 years is a long time. It is long enough to build an empire. It is long enough to almost forget. Almost. 31 years ago, the Holloway district. He was 19 years old and he had $27 and a name that meant nothing to anyone. Dominic Cross had been on his own since 16. He was not, at 19, a criminal in any organized sense. He was something more provisional than that. A young man in a neighborhood where the legitimate economy had largely ceased to operate, doing what was necessary to remain alive and to keep two other people alive with him. Two people. Elena, his foster sister, 18, sharp-tongued and furiously intelligent, working double shifts at a diner on the East End, and sending half her earnings to a savings account. She was building with the kind of methodical determination that comes from deciding with absolute clarity that your circumstances are a starting point and not a destination. And Marco Ruiz, his best friend since they were 12, since the day they'd been placed in the same group home on Fenwick Street, and discovered that their particular combination of stubbornness and wit created a specific kind of alliance that felt, to two children who had never had anything solid to stand on, almost like family. The three of them. It should be said, before the story proceeds to what it must proceed to, that there was a time when these three people loved each other with the uncomplicated, ferocious love of people who have chosen each other in the absence of anything else to choose. When Marco's laugh was the thing that made difficult evenings possible. When Elena's ambition was the proof that getting out was real. When Dominic's steadiness, even at 19, already that particular quality of still, was the thing that held all three of them upright when everything else shifted. There was a time. The night the debt was created, it was January, bitter, unforgiving January, the kind that the Holloway district wore like a punishment. Dominic was on his way home from a job he'd been doing for 3 months, inventory management for a man named Victor Raines, who ran a distribution operation out of a warehouse on the district's south edge. Not a legal distribution operation, but the work was regular and the pay was reliable, and in the Holloway district in that year, regular and reliable were more precious than legal. He came home to find Elena gone. Not a note, a message delivered through the medium of his sister's absence from Victor Raines. Because Dominic had seen something at the warehouse that he was not meant to see. What he had seen, a man being beaten to death for a debt, not an unfamiliar sight in the Holloway district. But this man, Carl Sutton, had borrowed a small amount of money from the wrong person and had no means to repay it, and was being beaten to death not because it was necessary or practical, but because Victor Raines wanted to make a point to the 3 other men watching, and Carl Sutton happened to be available for the making of that point. Dominic Cross had watched it for exactly long enough to understand what was happening, and then he had done something that changed everything. He had stopped it. Not cleverly, not strategically. He had walked across the warehouse floor, placed himself between Victor Raines and Carl Sutton, and said, in his quiet 19-year-old voice, that this was enough. Victor Raines had looked at him. And something in Dominic Cross's face, that extraordinary, unreadable stillness, the quality that would later define and terrify an entire criminal empire, had made Victor Raines pause. Just for a moment. Carl Sutton had survived, barely. And Dominic Cross had made an enemy of Victor Raines. And now Elena was gone. He called Marco. Marco came in 20 minutes, came without asking questions, without hesitation, the way people come when they are genuinely, uncomplicatedly on your side. Marco, what do you need? And Dominic told him. He obtained Elena's release by offering Victor Raines something more valuable than leverage over an 18-year-old girl. He offered to work for Raines directly, not as warehouse labor, as a solution to a problem Raines had been trying to solve for 2 years. A rival distributor named Eddie Carr, who was moving product through 3 of Raines's corridors and had proven too well connected to remove through normal business channels. Dominic Cross, at 19, had offered to solve the Eddie Carr problem. And he had. Elena came home. She was unharmed. She was frightened and furious, and she looked at Dominic across the kitchen of their small apartment, and she asked him what he had agreed to. He told her. She looked at him for a very long time. Elena, I can't stay here. He understood. He had always understood. Elena's savings account, Elena's methodical determination, Elena's absolute certainty that her life was a starting point, not a destination. She couldn't stay in the Holloway district while her foster brother became what he was becoming. Dominic, I know. Elena, I'm going to leave. I'm going far. I need you to understand that I won't be coming back. Dominic, I know. Elena, and I need you to understand something else. What you did tonight, what you agreed to, it doesn't end with Eddie Carr. You know that. Dominic, I know. Elena, once you're in that world, there's no coming back from it, Dominic. Dominic, I know. Elena, then why? Dominic Cross looked at his 19-year-old foster sister, who was the closest thing to family he had ever known. Dominic, because you needed to come home. Elena left 3 days later. He had made sure she had money for wherever she was going. She looked at him one last time at the door of the apartment. Elena, be careful. Dominic, you too. The door closed. He had not seen her since. Marco had been present for some of this. He had helped Dominic in those 48 hours, had driven the car, had stood at the door, had been the trusted presence that certain situations require. After Elena left, Marco looked at Dominic. Marco, so what now? Dominic, now I work for Raines. Marco, then I work for Raines. As simple as that, as uncomplicated. This too was the debt. Not just what Dominic had done, but what he had allowed Marco to do alongside him. What he had allowed the friendship to become, a professional arrangement, a shared descent, a mutual compromise that would unfold over years into something neither of them, on that January night, could have fully envisioned. Marco Ruiz had followed Dominic Cross into the world. And the world had made Marco Ruiz into someone who, 30 years later, was holding a girl in a compound in Juarez as leverage against a ghost he thought he'd finally cornered. Both of those things were the debt. Both of those things were what Dominic Cross was flying south to settle. The border. El Paso received him with wind and the smell of the desert, that particular dry mineral scent that has no equivalent in the cities of the north, that smells like the earth asserting itself, reminding you that it was here first and will be here last. He crossed into Juarez as Daniel Calloway, middle-aged businessman, manufacturing consultant, in the country for a site visit. The documentation was immaculate. Vega did not produce imperfect work. Interior, a nondescript hotel, Colonia Centro, Juarez 3:00 p.m. He checked in as Calloway. He took his bag upstairs. He showered. He sat on the edge of the bed and waited. At 4:15 there was a knock. 3 knocks, then 2, then 1. He opened the door. Rosa Medina. She was 49, small, with the contained, watchful quality of a woman who had spent decades in spaces that required her to be very careful and very fast. Her dark hair was shorter than it used to be. She had a bruise along her left jaw that was 3 or 4 days old, yellowing at the edges. She was wearing jeans and a gray jacket. She looked at him, he looked at her. The silence that moved between them was not the professional silence of his organization. It was the silence of history, the silence of two people who have more in common than any professional relationship could contain. Dominic, Rosa. Rosa, you look old. Something shifted in his face, barely there but there. Something that might, in a different setting, have been the beginning of a smile. Dominic, sit down. Rosa Medina had been, before joining the Cross organization, a DEA field agent who had spent 8 years undercover in the cartel networks and had emerged with a particular, comprehensive disillusionment about the capacity of institutional law enforcement to address systemic criminal infrastructure. She was the only person outside Dominic's immediate organization who knew about Elena. She was the one who had maintained the connection, carefully, at Dominic's request, in the way you maintain a connection that must never become a traceable line. She was the one who had sent the message. Dominic, tell me everything. Rosa told him. She sat across from him at the small table by the window and laid it out with the efficient, affectless precision of an intelligence professional delivering a situation report. No dramatization, no editorializing. The facts. Elena Reyes, she had been Elena Reyes for 20 years, the name chosen from a quiet desire to be something other than anything that belonged to the world she had left, had been living in Juarez for 7 years. She ran a community resource center in Colonia Patria, offering free legal aid, English classes, healthcare referrals. A good life, a quiet life. Until Marco Ruiz, newly installed as Del Cielo's Eastern Corridor chief, had moved his operation into Colonia Patria. Until Marco Ruiz had discovered, through the particular irony of a small world and a long memory, that the woman running the community center was Elena. Rosa, he's known about her connection to you for 3 months. He's been watching the center, watching her routine. 3 weeks ago, he had 2 of his men approach her. She refused to cooperate. She told them she hadn't had contact with Dominic Cross in 31 years. Dominic, that's true. Rosa, Marco knows it's true. That's not why he took her. Dominic looked at her. Dominic, then why? Rosa looked at him steadily, the look of a person who is about to say something that has weight. Rosa, because he knew you'd come. The room was very quiet. Rosa, Marco Ruiz doesn't want money from you. He doesn't want territory or information or any organizational asset. He's done well, he's built his own operation, his own structure. He doesn't need anything you can give him. He wants a conversation. That's what he said. Through the men he sent to her center, tell him I want a conversation. I think Marco Ruiz has been carrying something for 30 years. And he's decided it's time to put it down. Long silence. Dominic, he could have called. Rosa, he could have. Dominic, he didn't, because he knew I would have handled it from a distance. The way I handle everything, through people, through structures, he knew I wouldn't have come. Rosa, would you have? Long pause. Dominic, no, so he made it so I had to. Rosa, is she frightened? Dominic, I'd imagine so. Tell me about the compound. Rosa, he goes to his Mercado District office twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He takes 2 men, not his full security detail. He walks from the parking structure on Cal Diocese because the street parking is unreliable, and Marco has always had a preference for reliable things. Something crossed Dominic's face at that. Dominic, he hasn't changed. Rosa, he's changed enormously, and he's exactly the same as all of us. Rosa, I can get you into the office before he arrives, but Dominic, I need you to understand what happens to Alina if this goes wrong. Dominic, I understand. Rosa, if Marco perceives any threat, any tactical approach, his standing orders regarding the compound are absolute. Alina would not. Dominic, I understand. Rosa stared at him. In 11 years, she had never seen him do this. Rosa, you're not going in tactically. You're going to walk in to talk to him. Dominic, yes. Rosa, he'll kill you. Dominic, maybe. Have you seen his face since he found out about Alina, about me? Rosa, once from a distance. Dominic, what did he look like? A long pause. Rosa, tired, he looked tired. Dominic Cross nodded slowly. Dominic, good, then we have something to talk about. That night, Dominic Cross did not sleep. He sat in the small hotel room with the curtains open, the city of Juarez visible through the window, a city that had endured things that made his own neighborhood's poverty look almost comfortable, a city that had survived its own worst decades and was still, stubbornly, irreducibly, alive. He took out the photograph. We see it clearly now. A photograph worn at the edges, protected in a clear sleeve. 3 young people, maybe 19, 18, standing outside a building in winter. The young man in the middle is immediately recognizable as a much younger Dominic Cross, spare, sharp-eyed, with that same particular quality of stillness that even at 19 is already present, already fully formed. On his left, Elena. She is laughing at something outside the frame. Her laugh is visible in the way her whole face is given over to it completely, without reservation. On his right, Marco, looking at the camera with the wide, uncomplicated grin of someone who does not yet know what his face will be required to carry. Dominic looks at it for a long time. Then he puts it back in his pocket and waits for morning. 6. The architecture of consequence. They spent 3 hours in that room. Rosa had photographs, the compound, the layout, the guard rotations. 11 security personnel, as Vega had said, 2 vehicle gates, 1 pedestrian entrance. Marco Ruiz's schedule such as it was. After 3 hours, Rosa said what she needed to say one final time. Rosa, he'll kill you. Dominic, maybe, but I'll be there. That was the end of the tactical conversation. The rest was silence, and the city outside the window, and the particular weight of a man who has made a decision, and is simply waiting for morning to arrive so he can act on it. Tuesday. Exterior Mercado District 9:47 a.m. 3 minutes after a black SUV pulled into the parking structure on Cal Diocese, Marco Ruiz walked out onto the street. Dominic saw him from across the road. 31 years. Marco Ruiz was 50 now. He was heavier than Dominic remembered, broader through the shoulders, with a full beard gone mostly gray. He walked with a slight forward lean, hands in the pockets of a dark jacket, his two security men slightly behind and to either side. He looked from across the street, exactly like what Rosa had said. Tired. A man carrying something heavy for a very long time, so accustomed to the weight of it that he no longer stood straight. Dominic Cross stood up from the cafe table. He left money on the table. He walked across the street. Marco Ruiz was 3 steps from his office door when he stopped. He stopped because one of his security men stopped first, some peripheral, animal sense triggering before conscious recognition. Then Marco looked up and saw Dominic Cross standing on the sidewalk 10 feet away. The security men moved. Marco, no. Flat, certain. The voice of a man who has been expecting this and is absorbing the reality of it arriving. The security men stopped. Marco Ruiz and Dominic Cross looked at each other. 10 feet of sidewalk, 31 years. The morning continued around them. A vendor called out. A car passed. Somewhere a radio was playing. The ordinary machinery of a living city, indifferent to the specific gravity of 2 men standing on a sidewalk in its midst. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Marco, you came alone. Dominic, I came alone. Marco looked at him, really looked at him, the long look of someone taking inventory of change and continuity in a face they once knew completely. Marco, you look old. Dominic, so I'm told. And something passed between them, not warmth exactly, but its ghost, the echo of warmth, the memory of what warmth had once existed between these 2 people, before the world took what it took and made them what it made them. Marco, come inside. Interior Marco Ruiz's office, Mercado District, morning. The office was spacious, expensively furnished, not with the calculated, signal-sending aesthetic of Dominic's office, but with something more personal, more lived in. Books. Real books on real shelves, not decorative. A large desk, but also a sitting area, 2 leather sofas facing each other across a low table. Marco dismissed his security men, both of them. This was either an expression of confidence or an expression of something else, something that took Dominic a moment to identify, and then, when he identified it, sat in his chest with a specific weight. It was an expression of resignation. Marco crossed to the sideboard. He poured 2 glasses good whiskey. He brought both to the sitting area. He set one on the table. He sat down on one sofa. He looked at Dominic. Dominic sat down on the other. They picked up their glasses. Neither drank. Dominic, you want to talk? Marco, I want to talk. Dominic, then talk. Marco looked at his glass for a moment. When he looked up, his face had shed something, some professional layer, some organizational mask. What was underneath was tired and old and complicated and very familiar. Marco, I'm dying. Silence. Dominic's face did not change, but something behind it did. Marco, pancreatic. 6 months ago they told me 6 to 9 months, so you do the math. Dominic, let Alina go. Marco, I will. I'm going to let her go today. She was never at risk from me. I needed you here and I knew you wouldn't. I needed you to come, Dominic. Dominic, you could have called. Marco, you wouldn't have come for a phone call. A long silence. Dominic picked up his glass, drank, set it down. Dominic, what do you want, Marco? Marco Ruiz set down his glass. He looked at his hands on his knees. And then he said something that Dominic Cross had not expected, had not prepared for, had no defense against, something that cut through 23 years of empire and 31 years of distance like a blade through paper. Marco, I want you to tell me it was worth it. Silence. Marco, tell me what happened to us, what I let happen to myself, what I chose, what I followed you into. Tell me something good came out of it, something real, Something that justifies because I'm 3 months from the end, Dominic, and I've been looking for it. The justification. The thing that makes the math work, and I can't find it. Dominic Cross looked at Marco Ruiz. He looked at him for a long time. What was in his face was not guilt, exactly. Not grief, exactly. It was something more complicated. It was the look of a man who has been asked the question he has been asking himself for 31 years, and who does not yet have the answer. The confession. They talked for 2 hours. Not as bosses, not as the men they had become. As the boys they had been. This is the conversation that Dominic Cross had spent 31 years not having. Dominic. I knew what I was starting. I want to be clear about that. I didn't stumble into it. I chose it. I chose it for her first. And then it became its own thing. It became what I was instead of what I was doing. Marco watching him. Dominic. I kept telling myself it was protection. That what I was building was something that kept people safer. That there's an order to these things and someone has to maintain the order. And if I was doing it rather than someone less careful, I kept framing it as something righteous. That's the lie, Marco. That's the lie you tell yourself at 19 that you're still telling yourself at 50, that you're doing this instead of someone worse. Marco, more justified. Dominic. Yes, I believed it for a long time. Maybe I still believe parts of it. I don't know anymore what I actually believe and what I've just been saying. After a while, you can't find the original thing. The thing you were actually trying to do, trying to protect, trying to justify. It's under too many other things. Marco, Elena. Dominic. Elena, she's the original thing. Marco was quiet for a moment. Marco, I looked for her. After you and I split, couldn't find her. She was always good at disappearing. He almost smiled. The ghost of the old Marco Ruiz, the one who laughed easily, briefly visible. Dominic. She still is. Marco. How long have you known where she was? A pause. Dominic. 7 years. Marco, you've been watching over her from a distance, but never contact. Dominic. It's what she wanted. Marco nodded slowly. Something in his face shifted towards something that was not quite forgiveness but lived in the same territory. Marco, she always was the smartest of us. Dominic. She still is. They sat with that for a moment. Marco, I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer. Not the way you answer things, the way where you say something true that also protects you from the actual truth. The money I took when I left, you never came after me for it. Never sent anyone. I took from you in a way that nobody takes from you without consequences. And there were no consequences. Why? The question sat in the room. Dominic Cross was very still. And then he said something that might have been, in 31 years, the most honest thing he had ever said out loud. Dominic. Because I owed you. Because I brought you into that world. Because I let your friendship become a professional arrangement and I took the best thing you had, the uncomplicated decency you had when we were 19, and I made it complicated. And I made it dirty. And I called it loyalty. The money was the least of what I owed you. Marco Ruiz looked at Dominic Cross. Something moved across his face, the long arriving movement of a man receiving what he came for. Marco, I've been angry at you for 30 years, not always consciously, but it was there. The reason I went with Del Cielo, it wasn't the money. I needed to build something that was mine, not yours, not in your shadow, not an extension of what you decided for both of us on that night in January when we were 19. Because in the organization, it was always yours. You were always the one with the plan. I was always the one who showed up. Dominic absorbed this. He absorbed it the way the very best listeners absorb things, not to refute, not to manage, but to let it in, to let the full weight arrive. Dominic. Yes. One word. In that one word, in the agreement, the non-defense, the absolute refusal to diminish what Marco had just said. Something was given back. Something that had been taken by the slow erosion of 30 years of imbalance. Something that looked like being seen. Marco Ruiz looked down at his hands. He was silent. "Marco, I want to see her, Elena, before I'm gone. I want to apologize for what I did to her, holding her, using her. I want her to know that whatever I became, the person I was when we were young, that person still existed. Somewhere, that I didn't lose him entirely." Dominic was very still. This was the actual question, underneath all the others. Dominic, that's her choice to make. Marco, I know, but she might listen if you asked her. A very long pause. Dominic Cross looked at Marco Ruiz, and for one moment, one unguarded, extraordinary moment, the armor was completely gone. Not gradually, not partially. Gone. And what was there, what had always been there, underneath 23 years of empire, was grief. Clean, old grief. The grief of a 19-year-old boy who made a choice and spent the rest of his life trying to build something worthy of the cost. Dominic, I'll ask her. The twist. What changes everything? What follows changed everything. Not in the way of dramatic reversals, not the sudden appearance of armed men, not a violent resolution. What happened was smaller than that, and infinitely more devastating. Marco, I need to tell you something. The night Elena was taken, by Rains. The night you came to me and told me what happened and we went to get her back. I need to tell you something about that night. Something in his voice, a different register than before. The voice of a man who has been carrying a specific thing and has decided, finally, that the carrying is over. Marco, I knew. Silence. Marco, before you called me, I already knew. Rains had approached me 2 days before he took Elena. He wanted to know about you, about how you operated. He knew you'd seen what happened to Sutton. He was building leverage against you. He approached me because he knew we were close. He wanted information. The pen very still in Marco's hand. Dominic Cross across the desk, very still. Marco, I told him I didn't know anything useful. I told him to go to hell. That part is true. I didn't give him anything. But I didn't tell you he'd approached me. I didn't warn you. I told myself I'd handled it. Told myself there was no need to. I was afraid. Dominic, afraid of what? Even, completely, perfectly even. Marco, of losing you. If I'd told you, you would have handled Rains in the way you handled everything, and I was afraid of what that looked like, of what I'd be part of. I was afraid of what we were becoming, and I didn't tell you. And 2 days later, Elena was gone because Rains decided to act, and he stopped. He set down the pen. Marco, she was taken because of me, not just because you'd seen something at the warehouse, because I didn't warn you and Rains knew he had a window. Everything that happened after, Elena leaving, the choice you made, the world we built, all of it traces back to that. Dominic Cross sat in the silence. A very long silence. We watch his face. We watch the information arrive in it, not explode, not shatter, but arrive. Like water finding every crack, filling every space. The quiet, comprehensive flooding of a revelation that doesn't destroy what it touches, but changes its meaning entirely. Changes the meaning entirely. The debt was never just the choice Dominic made. The debt was what made the choice necessary. And the thing that made it necessary had been right beside him all along. This is what reframes everything. Not Marco's malice. Marco had no malice. Marco had been a scared 20-year-old who made the most human of decisions, who chose avoidance over honesty, who told himself the problem had passed because he needed it to have passed, and who had spent 31 years carrying the specific, compounding weight of knowing. And Dominic Cross, this calculating, cold, controlled man who had built an empire on the premise that information was the most valuable thing in the world, that you handled threats by seeing them coming, had spent 31 years with the origin of his wound sitting right beside him, not understanding that the wound had a different source than he thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, quieter than usual, the quiet of something very deep being very still. Dominic, why now? Marco, because I'm running out of time to say it, and because you came. You came alone and you sat across from me and you were honest with me. This morning, about the lie you told yourself. I couldn't take that and not give you this. Dominic Cross looked at Marco Ruiz. He looked at the man he had known since they were 12. He looked at all of those men, the one who showed up, the one who stayed silent at the wrong moment, the one who followed him into the world, the dying man across the desk with 31 years of undelivered honesty finally in the space between them. And he understood something. You can spend a lifetime assigning blame to yourself, to the world, to the specific choices and failures and moments of human weakness that accumulate into the shape of a life. And the assigning of blame solves nothing. It only specifies the absence. He thought of the photograph. He thought of 3 young people outside a building in winter, and a girl laughing, and a boy grinning at the camera, and a 19-year-old who was already, even then, learning to be still. Dominic, I know. Marco stared at him. Dominic, I know. And the 2 words were acknowledgement. The acknowledgement that Marco Ruiz had been carrying something and the carrying was over, that the weight was real, that the years were real, that Marco Ruiz existed, had always existed, as something more than a liability or a former asset or an organizational history, as a person, as the person who had shown up. Marco's face settled, the way a face settles when something it has been holding against the current finally finds the shore. Marco, what are you going to do after this? Dominic was standing at the office door. Dominic, something different. Marco, the organization. Dominic, will continue, or it won't. Either way, I've spent 23 years making myself necessary. I think it might be time to find out if that was a service to the people around me or just a way of ensuring I never had to be alone. Marco looked at him. Marco, that's the most honest thing you've ever said to me. Dominic, it's been a day for honest things. They did not shake hands. They had never been handshaking men, just a long look. The look of 2 men who grew up together and went separate ways and arrived at the end of things at a place where the ways had converged again, not in triumph, not in the way you planned, but converged. Both of them still here. Both of them honest, finally. Both of them in their different ways done. Dominic, take care of yourself, Marco. Marco, I'm a little past that, but yeah. Dominic Cross walked out of the office. He walked down the street of the Mercado district. The afternoon had gone golden, that specific golden hour of the desert, the light that makes everything it touches look both beautiful and ending. He walked in it. He didn't hurry. ACT3, The Reckoning. Elena. Interior Community Resource Center, Colonia Patria, afternoon. The center was small, bustling, improbably warm. The particular warmth of a space that has been filled with genuine purpose rather than institutional function. Hand-painted signs in Spanish and English. Children's drawings on the walls. A folding table with water and fruit. The smell of coffee and paper, and the particular smell of a place where difficult things are addressed without drama, because the people addressing them have decided that is what the space is for. Elena Reis stood at the filing cabinet against the far wall. She was 50 years old. She was exactly as Dominic had known she would be, herself, fully, completely herself, the same furious intelligence, the same decisive competence. The years had settled her features, added gravity to the laugh lines around her eyes, made her movements more certain, less provisional. But she was recognizably, irreducibly the person she had always been. When the center's door opened and Dominic Cross walked in, She had her back to the door. She knew before she turned. 31 years and she knew. She turned slowly. They looked at each other. The room continued around them. A phone rang. Someone answered it. Outside, a child called to another. The world persisted. Elena Reyes walked through the center's small, purposeful space and stopped 3 feet from her foster brother. She looked at him. He looked at her. Elena, you're older. Dominic, everyone keeps saying that. And she laughed. A short, startled laugh, the laugh of genuine surprise, the laugh of someone who has not expected to laugh in this moment and cannot help it. Elena's laugh, the same laugh from the photograph, the same whole-face commitment. It lasted only a moment, then it subsided. And they were standing in its aftermath, in the strange, spacious quiet of 2 people who have briefly, unexpectedly, set down 31 years. Elena, come. Interior Elena's office, continuous. A desk, 2 chairs. A window facing a small courtyard where 2 plastic chairs sat under a tree. Stacked files. A child's drawing taped to the wall, a sun, a house, the word gracias in uneven letters. They sat. Elena, you came because of the message. Dominic, I came because you were in danger. Elena, I'm safe now. Marco released me this morning. His men were polite, actually, which was disorienting. He sent a message with them. He said you'd be coming. He said to tell you he was sorry. Dominic looked at the child's drawing on the wall. Dominic, how are you? Elena, I've been scared for 3 weeks. I'm tired. My staff have been worried about me and I've had to manage their worry in addition to my own. And I'm glad you're here. I didn't think I would be. I've spent a lot of years being very sure about my relationship to your world and to you, and I'm glad you're here. Dominic, I should have. Elena, don't do the apology. I know what you would have done differently and it doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo anything, and you know that as well as I do. Dominic, then what do we do with it? And in his voice, for the first time in this story with this person, there was something undefended, something that was just a question. Elena, we're here, right now. That's not nothing, Dominic. 31 years and you're sitting in my office in Juarez. You came for me. I know what that cost you. I know what it means that you're here. Dominic, it doesn't balance anything. Elena, no, it doesn't have to. They sat with that. Outside the window, the plastic chairs under the tree. A bird, a bright one, improbably bright for Juarez in autumn, landed on the back of one of the chairs and tilted its head. Dominic, Marco. Elena, tell me. Dominic, he wants to see you. He's dying. He wants to apologize. I think he spent 30 years being something he chose in order to stop being something he was. And I think he's run out of time to keep being that, and what's left is closer to who he actually was. Elena, that's a generous reading. Dominic, it's what I saw. She looked at her foster brother, the man he had become, the boy she had known. The distance between them, the genuine gap created by 31 years of parallel living. Elena, I'll think about it. Dominic, that's all I'm asking. A pause. Elena, are you going back? Dominic Cross looked at Elena Reyes. He looked at the child's drawing, the courtyard, his hands. Dominic, I don't know. This surprised her. He could see that it surprised her. Elena, that's the first time I've ever heard you say that. Dominic, yes, I think it might be. That night they sat at her kitchen table, small, practical, covered in papers and a plant that needed water. And she made coffee efficiently, without ceremony and very well. And she told him, in the direct, unsparing language that had always been hers, exactly what she thought about the life he had led. Not with cruelty, with the specific honesty of a person who has spent 31 years not saying something and has just been reminded that not saying it was its own kind of lie. He sat and he listened. He did not defend himself. When she finished, she refilled both coffees and sat back down. Ieliane, there. Dominic, there. A pause. Ieliane, you look tired. Dominic, I am tired. Alina Reyes looked at her foster brother. She looked at him with the seeing everything quality that had always been her gift, and she saw what was there, a man at the end of something, not the end of his life, the end of a way of being. Ieliane, are you going to be okay? Dominic, I think I'm going to find out. Alina Reyes nodded slowly. She picked up her coffee, he picked up his. Outside Alina's window, Juarez in the night, a city that was still here, as was Alina, as was Dominic, as was, somewhere across the city, a dying man who had finally set something down. The night moved. The coffee was very good. They sat at the kitchen table and talked, not about organizations or debts or empires, about small things, about the center and the people who came to it, about whether the coffee in the Holloway District bodega had actually been as good as they remembered or whether it was just that everything from that time was filtered through the strange, distorting light of before. They talked for 3 hours. Nobody hurt anybody. Nobody needed to. He paid everything. 3 weeks after Juarez. Interior Cross Capital Management, executive floor morning. Felix Dre was on the phone when Dominic walked in. He ended the call without finishing it, a thing Felix Dre had never done in 16 years. He ended it because the sight of Dominic Cross walking off the elevator and across the executive floor, the same walk, the same bearing, but with something different about it that Felix couldn't immediately name, was the kind of thing that seemed to require his full attention. Dominic walked past the glass offices, past the assistants who stood slightly straighter when he passed, past the artwork on the walls, past the floor-to-ceiling view of his city. He stopped at his office door. He looked at his name, D. Cross, etched on the glass for a moment. Then he went in. Felix followed. Dominic, the Marchetti proposal. Felix expired as instructed. Dominic, good. He sat down. He looked at his desk, the familiar geometry of it, the organized surface, the view. He had sat in this chair thousands of times. He sat in it now and felt it differently. Not worse, not less, differently. Felix, how are things? An unusual question. 3 words that lived outside the professional vocabulary they had maintained for 16 years. Dominic, different, things are different. Felix, the organization. Dominic, still here, still mine, but I'm going to start doing something I've never done. Felix, what's that? Dominic, thinking about what comes after, not strategically, not organizationally, just what a man leaves behind. What's actually left when the structures are gone and the assets are distributed and the organization is either inherited or dissolved? What's left? Felix Dre looked at his employer for a long moment. He had never, in 16 years, heard Dominic Cross speak this way. And the extraordinary thing was that it didn't sound like weakness. It sounded like the opposite of weakness. It sounded like a man who has found something harder than power, something that requires more courage than an empire. Felix, what did you find? Dominic Cross looked at the window. His city. Below, 40 floors down, the city went about itself. Taxis and delivery trucks and pigeons and people in scrubs walking fast and children in school buses and bodegas with metal grates half raised, and 100,000 ordinary mornings being ordinary. His city or not his, or both, or neither. Dominic, I found out what I was actually building, all those years. I told myself it was protection. I told myself it was order. Parts of that were true, most of it was noise, very expensive, very powerful, very carefully maintained noise, so I didn't have to hear the quiet. Felix, what's in the quiet? Dominic Cross turned from the window. He looked at Felix Dre, 16 years this man, stood beside him through everything. Dominic, the things that actually matter, the people you actually love, the choices you actually can't undo, the question of whether you spent your one life on something real. Felix, and did you? Dominic Cross looked at the window one last time. He thought of Alina across a kitchen table at midnight, laughing at something. He thought of Marco's face settling. He thought of the photograph. He thought of 3 young people outside a building in winter, 31 years ago, when the whole terrible, magnificent disaster was still only beginning. Dominic, I'm still working on that part. 3 weeks later, the phone call came at 3:17 a.m. Rosa's voice, controlled, professional, stripped down to its bare function. Felix Dre received it standing in his kitchen, in the dark, in the specific silence of a man who has been waiting for a phone call he knew was coming and still, when it comes, finds that knowing changes nothing. He said nothing for a long moment. Felix, was it Marco's people? Rosa, no. Marco's operation has been stood down. He's 3 weeks from the end. This was Del Cielo's central command. Someone above Marco. Someone who decided that Dominic Cross walking into Juarez alone was an opportunity that wouldn't come twice. Silence on the line. Felix, they're right, it wouldn't have. He ended the call. He stood in his kitchen. He stood there for a long time. He thought about 16 years. He thought about a man who drove himself to a private airfield with a single bag and a clean passport, and the particular settled expression of someone who has made peace with the mathematics. Felix Dre understood, standing in his dark kitchen, something he had not permitted himself to understand while Dominic Cross was alive. He understood that Dominic had known. Not tactically, not through intelligence failure. He had known in the way you know when you stop protecting yourself, when you walk into a room with no armor and no backup and no contingency, not because you're careless but because you've decided, at some level beneath language, that the debt is more important than the survival. He had paid it. Fully, completely, with everything. Interior Community Resource Center, Colonia Patria, the next morning. Alina Reyes opened the center at 7 the way she opened it every morning. She put the coffee on. She unlocked the front door. She sat at her desk. She had not heard yet. She would hear within the hour. But right now, she just sat at her desk in the morning, in the center that was hers, in the life she had built from scratch with her own hands and her own stubborn intelligence, and her absolute refusal to let the world she'd come from define the world she was going to. She sat there and thought, for no reason she could identify, about her foster brother. About the last time she'd seen him, sitting across her kitchen table at midnight, drinking coffee, talking about nothing, laughing once at something. She couldn't even remember what. She sat with that. The coffee maker finished. The smell of it filled the room. She closed her eyes. She thought about a boy who had always been still, who had stood at every door like he was guarding it, who had spent 31 years building walls and calling them protection, who had, in the end, walked through every single one of them to get back to the people he loved. She thought about that. Outside, the morning was beginning. The street was waking. A child ran past the window calling to another child. A dog, a radio, the irreducible, ordinary aliveness of a Tuesday. Alina Reyes opened her eyes. She poured the coffee. She began her day. The last image. The empty road outside Juarez. The Merced's engine still running. Headlights cutting the desert dark. The open driver's door. The shoe on the asphalt. The desert in every direction. Vast, indifferent, honest. Some debts can only be paid in full. Dominic Cross understood this. He had always understood this. He just needed 31 years to decide it was worth it. Dominic Cross. The letter. After the fade to black, after the closing quote, after the silence. One last image. A letter handwritten on plain paper in low light. The camera holds on it, we read. Dominic, by the time you read this, I'll already be gone. There's something I never told you about the night Elena was taken. Something Marco didn't know either. Something only I know. And I need you to understand, before you decide what kind of man you're going to be from here, that the choice you made at 19 was never actually yours to make. The letter is signed. We almost see the name. Almost. Cut to black. No name, no explanation, no resolution. Just the audience in the dark asking, who wrote the letter? What did they know? What does it mean that the choice was never his to make? The most dangerous thing a powerful man can do is not destroy something. It is to finally, quietly put it down and walk away whole. Dominic Cross.